I didn't want to have to be waking up in the morning and dealing with this. Typically, oh, my mic's too quiet. I don't want to have to be waking up and dealing with this. To be honest, I don't ever really want to give time to people who are, I mean, as Broden put it, fucking, you know, someone who isn't a real commie, someone who only entertains trolls and children and works as a lackey for Moppin whenever Moppin wants him to fucking roll around fucking stream sniping because Moppin's too lazy to watch the things. No, Moppin didn't watch it because he didn't fucking even challenge some of the most condemning positions I laid against him unless he's that much of a coward and can't even fucking stand by himself. But I'm dealing with a geezer here. You know, I wake up to hearing about, you know, this geezer who, the way that they broke up with each other, the way Darksnovia and Ewoks and Hinge broke up with each other was via fucking the geezer holding the death of, like, the day it happened, the death of Darksnovia's mother over his head and using it to abuse him. And he got loads of other people to mess with Darksnovia without them even knowing the Mandem's mom was dead. Manipulated them into going against him. Like this is some proper narcissistic behavior. And this was because Darksnovia started to agree with Third Worldism and started to get closer to Net and Jason. So he torpedoed the geezer. And Net, a guy he doxed Mandem, and you're gonna come about fucking trying to speak all high and mighty. And I mean, there's links in the description for the whole record regarding this dickhead's bullshit. And there's Brodans video as well in the link and Darksnovias Response. But I mean, there's a really big point to get into. Trying to call man lazy, like, fucking man's shaping between, you know, the fact he's disabled, working, and trying to produce content. Of course he's not going to be producing videos every day, the fucking weaky dipshit. Not only is he someone who's trying to, because it's really psychologically jarring when you struggle with disabilities, so he's trying his best to be in work, because when you're not in work, your brain is not actuating properly and it messes with you. So Mandem's in work and he's pushing himself hard. But then he's got to contend with burnout. He's got to contend with all the problems that come from being in that lumpen proletarian situation of trying to work with disability. The fact that when you are on the programs they put you on, when you try and work with disability, they don't stick you on, you know, like a Wednesday in the middle of the day where it will be pretty calm because most people are at work. No, they'll stick you on a fucking Saturday where it's the fucking busiest day of the week. And well, I've heard Sundays are worse than America. But nonetheless, the weekends are the busiest days of the week, and because they get subsidized for disabled workers on these programs, the businesses do, they see it as essentially almost free labor. I don't know whether it maps out to free or whether it just covers most of the cost. I don't know how the subsidization works. I imagine it varies county by county, not even just state by state. I imagine it's a county thing. But nonetheless, they're basically exploiting the fact that they have cheaper labor, so they stick them on a rush time, times of the day where they get the highest number of sales, so they make the most amount of profit out of these disabled workers that they shove into these rings. Amandem's calling him lazy. Like, we're talking about some terminally online labor aristocrat who barely ever got a dirty fingernail in his life. He's never been on the streets. He's never had to collect a fucking, dole or anything like that. He's never been thrown onto the streets because he lost his job and he couldn't pay his rent, and trying to sign up onto social security is a fucking nightmare and fucks you over, and you're not likely going to get the support you need until you're already on the streets. And I mean, what the fuck is it to support then when you've literally got no protections and you're living in poverty that people in the first world don't even fucking understand. Like, these people who live in capitalist realism, they ain't got a clue of it. Fucking middle class people who drink £5 coffees and eat avocado toast, that their biggest complaint in the world is that they have to pay some of their paycheck off to a uni degree that got them a job that pays them 60 grand a year. Suck your mom. Like, what the fuck is these people all are like this, whether they got that job or not. I mean, you got someone like fucking BLiberal who still lives with his parents, so it don't matter that he ain't got that. The fact he is my age and can still do that means he comes from a family that has a decent background. Because when you live in a poor background, you ain't got the money to fuck around with someone living off of your pee all the time. Because I don't see the work ethic behind the guy. I don't know where the fuck his money's coming from for him to support himself. So it's got to be coming from his family. Mandem's not got any serious disabilities or anything. Why isn't he in work? Because you're punching at Mandem who has serious disability and is at work. Mandem was abandoned by the school system. Had to teach himself because the school system, because of his special needs that didn't make him incapable of learning, it made him struggle with the type of learning that is normal for school systems, which is typical for people with Asperger's and other forms of autism. And instead of helping him, they crammed him in a section of the school that doesn't try and properly teach you. Exactly. He's been pretty much living completely on his own since 2009. But I mean, this is what you expect from the type of people who back up these kind of statements here as well on my screen. The mouse isn't visible, so you can't see that I'm pointing at it, but you know what I'm on about. It's the only things on the screen. Let's get my hopes up, like, hey, and I look over the other screens and no mouse. But the what's it? You know, the guy was turning around. He's like, "Oh, we're not speaking out against the disabled proletariat." Lumpen proletariat. If you're saying it's some of them are criminalized, which you said in your video, which actually contradicts what Caleb says here, because Caleb pretty adamantly, and I'm not cutting anything out, pretty adamantly says lumpen are criminalized elements. That is an absolute. He has not given any partitioning of the statement. That would then argue that the disabled are criminalized elements, because if you're saying only some of them, that means you are complying to my definition, because I'm saying the disenfranchised proletariat, which, yes, many of them have to commit to an illegal market. If you can't exist on the legal market, you are a bit fucked, aren't you? No shit. But that's not everyone. Especially not the mass amount of people in the lumpen proletariat who are disabled. More than 3/4 of people on the street are disabled. People who are homeless. Like, it's complete discrimination. And it comes from this very Malthusian mentality we've been seeing from these Morpinites. They talk all this fucking squat that they fucking that they care about this, they care about that, but it is just that. It's squat, it's shit. Because if they really cared about the lower class, when lumpen proletarians, literally the poorest people in the first world, have a problem with their positions, and their argument is, no, we're criminalized elements, we're bastards, we'll be, you know, we want to organize around communism, but we're being told we'll just be the allies of fascism, so we're being told to fuck off. This comes to the same idiom that I've told people about the working class. You know, if someone says something like, oh, immigrants are coming and stealing our jobs, if your conclusion is to say that all workers are racist because someone says that, or that worker in and of itself is racist, well done. You're never going to push anything anywhere. Of course, people have reactionary ideas. Welcome to capitalism. Welcome to class oppression. But reactionary ideas get worse as you go up in class. I mean, I've been told by a very, very few trans people in this country that transphobia in this country is worse down south than it is up north. And if you look demographically, the north is massively poorer than the south. trans workers are typically lumpenized due to their disenfranchisement because of the way in which they're seen within society. None of us want to talk about Caleb Moppin or his group. We're left with no choice not doing so with BLiberalism. Of course, because he's making a movement and he's doing activity from the right, and he's a problem. I mean, he says all this about appealing to workers, but then his big appeal is to the January 6th protest types, which were all Labour aristocrats. I mean, there were some workers there, people who'd lost their jobs, but most people who were there were not them. I mean, a lot of people came from across the country to do that. Like, the whole fucking country. People don't understand the fucking shit that went down there because they're not looking into it. What's it? We watched the system fold itself like a pretzel as the FBI went around playing fucking half the sides involved. It wasn't everyone, but it was enough everyone there. I mean, they certainly had the Proud Boys by the balls. And, I mean, the police definitely were on their side. But the, what's it? It's also the fucking, his appeal to Trump himself. Like, Caleb was overjoyed with, what Trump, what Trump had to say about him being his favorite reporter. Tell I've only been up for an hour. With Trump being his favorite reporter, he was overjoyed with it, and as Darksnovias is saying here, Caleb Moppin was literally doing a stereotype of black people. He was doing his tirade against the disenfranchised. Yeah, he was using a racially charged stereotypical voice, to talk about people being like gangsters or something like that. It was going proper type of shit you would see from like a 60s film that's using racism as the butt of its joke. And anyone knows what the 60s was like in America. Gangsters is in the using the context is being used here as a slur. A gangster was a middle class, petty bourgeois thing. To call posses and street orgs gangs, which is caught on in the streets now, like because of the labeling. That's seen as since it was like the late 70s or the 80s that started to catch on as a term in the lower class. So people started to identify with that term rather than posse or an org. I mean, people still do. I mean, when I was growing up, people still use the term posse, but nonetheless, gang caught on, and then you got gang culture, which is just, people blow it out of the water as this one united thing when it's different conglomerations of gang culture because there's not one class involved in gang culture. There's multiple different classes and multiple different iterations of how these street orgs form. But it's caught on because of the labeling of this, and this comes from a problem of the way in which those who bathe in the society of capitalist realism, especially those of the pay bourgeois and the labor aristocracy, oppress the lumpen proletariat. These people literally act like the stereotypical communist. It feels like they almost exclusively seek to make communists look like mentally deranged people. That's what the CPI is. I mean, I had a whistleblower contact me and tell me the same thing, Well, he more explicitly said they are a, what's the words? Anti-communist cult. Similar to LaRouche. And before they go, whoa, he's going against LaRouche. LaRouche was literally an aide to Reagan. Fuck you. Like, Oh no, they'll turn around and go, "Oh, that makes Reagan one of the good Bonapartists. Let's add him to the list." Bonapartism is for fucking moronic fascists. Get fucked. Do you know what though? I think one thing I will do, because once again, as I was iterating earlier, Darksnovias been working hard, so he hasn't had the chance to allow this yet. So I'm gonna take advantage to read it on stream, the response to Caleb, because he was also slandering that and nullifying that. So I'll pop that in absolute wordage, so it is completely uncoalesced. Is that the right word? No. Uncompromised in any mannerism. It's just out there. Autism and the problem of always getting the words wrong. We are called ultras, yet none of us are advocating anything but the self-defense. But self-defense, not advocating for people to commit random acts of violence. Anybody that watches our content knows that bullshit. Ultras, if anything, is what Caleb's group is doing, but by constantly starting fights with other communists and burning bridges with people for little to no reason. If anything, they're the ultras. Ultra leftists and fascists are on the same side of the coin, and to me, they are the ultra leftists. I mean, they're trying to take a position of like that of them being like ultra in their content, but they of themselves are not very ultra. They're more just straight up Mussoliniite, Mosleyite types. Like Caleb has really shown that now. Like Roosevelt and Lincoln is to Caleb what Augustus and Kaiser is to Mussolini. That's really shown with the way he defended class collaborationism, turned around and said class collaborationism was a good thing. I'll cover that video in a second, actually, because fucking hell. Should have enough time. Yeah, it's only been 17 minutes. Let's get to classism against the disabled. Pause. Sort by newest first. So Caleb said, I said absolutely nothing about disabled workers in my stream. The literal definition of, quote, lumpen-proletariat, end quote, includes criminality. The word, quote, lumpen, end quote, is derived from the word German that means miscreant. I followed Marx's actual definition of the term, not the new left petit bourgeois redefinition. I see a huge amount of projection here. You are desperate to be victims and get offended. Sorry. You are so desperate to tear me down. I don't feel bad. Sorry. He's so funny. He's oh god, a bottle of angst. You must have a shitty life to be such a shallow, bitter, hateful, deceitful person. So he hasn't been able to see this yet because, like I said, Darksnovias has been hard at work, so he hasn't had the chance to go on his computer yet to allow it past the filter because I may have got a bit too spicy. But the it starts off with this. So please define what the projection we are presenting is, buddy. I find it funny that you are associating us with the new left when your brand of sewer socialism is right in line with their reformist social democratic bullshit. You keep slandering the ideas of proletarian panthers as petty bourgeois, whilst you beat the out of date definition held by Marx. I think I meant to say beat the drums on the out of date. Sometimes I miss words. Beat the drums on the out of date definition held by Marx. A literal member of the petty bourgeois intelligentsia. You are absolutely full of shit. You are going. I mean, to be fair as well, another thing to add about Marx I didn't put in there. Marx ended up being a lumpen petty bourgeois. Living off the bank of Engels. So I mean, you know, someone's a bit of an alcoholic hypocrite. But whilst you be absolutely full of shit, you go about saying, you go about throwing around slurs like quote gangsters end quote in a discriminatory fashion, showing you know nothing of the streets. No surprise, the petty bourgeois white yank doesn't know shit about the streets. Maybe you should sit the fuck down and listen to those with experience, you punts. And that you don't even know the difference between gangs, posses, and street organizations. You come from a petty bourgeois background, Caleb. I am from a proletarian background, Caleb. In life, you have persisted to retain a petty bourgeois lifestyle. In my teenage years, due to the disadvantages of my disability combined with growing up in a hyper-abusive household, I plummeted into the lumpen proletariat. I was homeless at 18, got into a hostel before I turned 19, and then went homeless again 5 months later. If you think some inexperienced petty bourgeois wino like you is going to come and tell me, someone who grew up in the most crime-intensive estate in my town, that is a sacrifice zone, I had to learn the street as soon as I was 10. By the time I was 13 years old, I'm tackling drug addiction, manic depression, severe PTSD, fibromyalgia, generalized anxiety disorder, thyroiditis, and I wasn't brought up in some hokey-pokey liberal upbringing where the harshest thing you can get bitchy at your father was that I put could, but I meant to say couldn't, is that you couldn't talk communism at the dinner table. I was raised in a militaristic style upbringing that was heavily abusive physically, and was heavily abused physically and psychologically. My fibromyalgia was actuated. I say actuated as the condition comes from an intersection of heritage and experience, for it is an imprint left on descendants of people who were worked in factories as children in the Industrial Revolution. By the extreme physical abuse I was exposed to from a very young age, I would get the shit beaten out of me for mere disagreeing on any topic with my dad, and to then have, quote, have the gall, end quote, to press my position and argue my point. I will be met with extreme violence. Talking at the dinner table wasn't a fucking thing we did. When there's food in front of us, we were to, quote, shut up and eat your food, end quote. Which isn't too bad of a fucking practice. I mean, if it goes fucking cold and you start complaining about it, I wouldn't want to fucking near that if I was as fucking struggling as hard as my dad. But no, it's not a nice environment. Families normally connect at the dinner table. We had the TV on sometimes, but if you watch that too much, it would get turned off too. Yeah. Food's there to be eaten at that point in time. You can chat after your dinner. Which isn't a bad practice. And you may have been told to, quote, shut up, end quote, when you expressed communist views. When I joined a communist party 3 months after my 18th birthday, my dad kicked me out, told me to pack my bags and get the fuck out. So don't even try to come here and talk. You're all it, and you know your shit. When you're an inexperienced petty bourgeois intellectual coming and trying to smack down organic intellectuals with the most dishonest and slimy, oh no, the counter-revolutionary slime, spooky, of tact. And Caleb, buddy, old pal, my dickety chum, we don't do this because we're, quote, getting offended, end quote. We do this because you're a problematic figure that's pushing for class collaborationism, the literal backbone of fascism and other neo-feudal ideologies, Americanism, historical revisionism, Taylorism, sewer socialism, Chinese-style imperialism, which is essentially what Oswald Mosley wanted for the British foreign policy, and that you hold Malthusianistic sentiment towards the lumpen proletariat, regardless of how much you try to project that onto your opponents. Heck, you always seem to twist Malthusianism as well. Malthus wasn't a degrowther. Malthus pushed for the system to work people to death to produce a post-scarcity for the aristocratic and bourgeois sector of society, and then cull the rest of us in the proletariat and lumpen proletariat. It's not, quote, degrowth, end quote. And man, you should maybe look into the crisis of overproduction. I'm being coy. I know you've cited it on stream before, which is why it's glaringly obvious the blatant dishonesty you are purveying here. You're obfuscating and obscuring what you can to make it fit your petty bourgeois class interests, as Engels warned of regarding petty bourgeois, quote, socialism, end quote, in Socialism, Scientific or Utopian. You come here flapping your gums like you know it all, fam. It's indicative of how much of a petty bourgeois chauvinist you are. You lack the damned experience to be telling lumpen proletarians what it is like in the lumpen proletariat. Whom the fuck do you think you are? Because whatever it is, it feels very Jordan Peterson inspired. And on the whole, Marx's definition is this: it's based off X word 150 years ago. You are aware you are pushing rationalism, right? Which is a contradictory position to dialectical materialism. Dialectical materialism is an empirical philosophy of scientific analysis. Semantic progression has words dialectically change definitions over time. This is a natural dialectical process and is very much easily observable very much an easily observable process of language, and an unavoidable one, especially given the nature. I started sounding like John Cleese then. Oh, this pigeon is dead. I'd like to return this parrot. People need to watch the parrot sketch. It's great. Its feet were glued to the... it's not dead, mate. It's just asleep. But, especially given the nature of how we intellectually engage with the world. Engels has a great quote on the nature of dialectics in Socialism, Scientific or Utopian. Quote, "When we consider and reflect upon nature at large, or the history of mankind, or our own intellectual activity, at first we see the pictures of an endless entanglement of relations and reactions, permutations and combinations in which nothing see. Therefore, at first, the picture was a whole, with its individual parts still more or less kept in the background. We observe the movements, transitions, connections, rather than the things that move, combine, and are connected. The primitive, naive, intrinsically correct conception of the world is that of ancient Greek philosophy, and was first clearly formulated by Heraclitus. I can't do Greek, so whichever way was right, go with it. But the click guy. Everything is and is not for. Everything is fluid. Everything is and is not, for everything is fluid, is constantly changing, constantly coming into being and passing away. So quit the rationalistic bullshit of, quote, Marx said it, end quote. I don't care whom said it. If the statement they made and the analysis to go with it holds no fruit, or no longer or no longer holds the fruit it once did, then the statement they made and the analysis to go with it holds no fruit, or no longer holds the fruit it once did. Then the statement is no longer valid, and the analysis of co-material conditions must be followed to direct us to the truth most relative to our era. Dialectical rationalism is very Hegelian. You are relying way too much on this metaphysical equation of pure opposites, and are selectively dogmatizing parts of Marxism to suit your petty bourgeois adventurism. You remind me so much of Mussolini. He started off as a petty bourgeois Marxist. He was the guy who I had a brain fucking, I can't even know how to word it. You stagger back. The guy whom translated Das Capital into Italian. Heck, he wasn't. Sorry, he was even praised by Lenin at one point. Sorry, I struggle with breathing. And look where he ended up, leading the fascist movement for a decaying Italy, just as you seek to push for a decaying American empire. And you're calling us shallow, and you go around scouring the internet for any mention of you to combat it. Pure megalomania, fam. At Caleb Marpin. I don't know why I read the at. You really are letting me down as well. I expect more from big brain Kaiserist Caleb Marpin than just, quote, know you, end quote. But if that is the focal point, I put if instead of is. Fucking 2 keys away. I've been up for about 24 hours when I was typing this, I think. Yeah, because it was just coming around the middle of the day. Then it shows, Moppin than just know you, but if that is the focal point of your capacity to engage, then it shows the shallowness of the angle you play. And he's pulling this like, ooh, you've shamed me. You've shamed me. Caleb, you shame yourself every time you open your fucking trap. Let me go on to Discord. We'll go for the long one because it's got the funky stuff in it. I need to turn my telly down.
Deranged ultra-leftist extremist group. And the foreign minister that was originally appointed...
Deranged. That's a great start. It's using slurs that are used to savage people with nasty mental health and psychological health issues to deal with people who have bad ideas. And mind you, with The Shining Path, he's playing into US propaganda a lot here because, yes, bad things happen under the leadership of Gonzalo. Fucking no one is no one's disagreeing with that, even to the point where there was a couple of massacres that I'm aware of that could be properly proved, and there's hearsay about other stuff, but not the evidence isn't quite clear because the US has murkied the water and everything. But that's not The Shining Path in a whole. Gonzalo was holed up in the city. Fucking, of course, not only was his fucking mindset towards things blinded, but he was also very disconnected from the way things were organized. And there was a lot of good shit that came out of The Shining Path, and The Shining Path still struggles today. And here's the thing, even if, like, he did have some manageability at controlling the whole damn thing and got everyone all over him and all that and the other, does that make the whole organization incapacitated to recover from that? Gonzalo didn't start the org. He comes to become the leader of it, but he didn't start it. The movement it comes from as well is, Gonzalo, when he made the whole push with The Shining Path, because that's what he began, was the movement of The Shining Path. That was based off an already existent movement that had happened in Peru. Like, the Shining Path was a continuation of Peruvian anti-colonial struggle. And you cannot dare try and take that away from them, people. Regardless of what opinion you have of Gonzalo, you cannot turn around and take the anti-colonial movement away from them. That is their fucking God-given right. Doesn't matter what you think of it. If they want the US, the Soviet Union, they want China, they want Britain, they want France, they want fucking Germany, they want Spain, they want Russia out of their country. They have a right to boot them out by any means necessary. Their armies, their capitalist exploiters, have no right in anyone else's land. Every land has a right to its own self-determination. Let's get into this clip here, man. Oh, no. That's the wrong tab. Is it? What? It's not even showing a window I've opened. What? Add window capture. Firefox. Hey, there we go. Full screen this bozo. I'm going to improve the quality for you, everyone. So, we're just going to watch his head waving about. Can we like one of those Fallout games, you know? Like the good Fallout games? LOL. Goddamn, all these commies playing Fallout 2. My favorite comment on that video, I think it was from... was it from Pride Tunes or was it from... No, I think it was from MLM. Ooh. No, I can't remember who it was from. But, so I remember my favorite comment on that, on the whole Fallout thing that Gabe did about Jason, where he used a Confederate song. Is my favorite comment was, yeah, if only Jason had played Fallout 2, that would be that would be better. Because Caleb just thinks so highly of us. Oh no, he's taken over the stream, guys. What are we gonna do? It's the closest we'll get to having him on because he's too much of a coward. Oh, there we go. I know how to use OBS. Don't mess with me. Anyway, I gotta go to bed. I'll watch the rest of this when I get up, down with the gaslighter. Respect, brother, and down with gaslighters, absolutely. So let's go.
It was a deranged ultra-leftist extremist group. And the foreign minister that was originally appointed by the current president of Peru, Pedro Castillo, his first foreign minister said they were a CIA organization. Now, I've never heard that. I've never seen any evidence of that. But
he's literally just, his first move is to come out and proselytize positions led by a government that has support from the United States. Because that foreign minister who did say that they were part of the CIA was someone who's had a history of being against the communists in Peru. It's not just some guy who came out of the woodwork and said some nice stuff. But you just gotta pedal, like, he does this a lot. He does whataboutisms and or brings up things that he won't confer on. I'm not seeing anything, but and he's doing it to murky the water on the position he's pushing because there's not enough evidence to push his position. I mean, it's especially harder for people to push this position because it's became public now that the death toll in Peru during that war was half of what it was publicized as.
Yeah, the Shining Path was this crazed, deranged peasant Jacobin, head chopping, bloodthirsty group, and people were terrified of them, and so the bourgeoisie used it to set up a military dictatorship, and they installed Fujimori as the military dictator, and then not so
false. The military dictatorship was brewing anyway. That was something that came from the cartels wanting to strike against the social democratic government that was in power. That was what spurred on the dictatorship. You know, out with one militaristic out with one militaristic social democratic government, the moderate ring of fascism, and in with the fascist dictatorship. That's what happened. It was a process of not just that, but also the U.S. backing this dictatorship to put it into power. Like, you're gonna completely remove the fact that there was an imperial Cold War going on between the U.S. and the Soviet Union at this time, between social imperialism and imperialism. And, you know, what's it? Like, Jacobin head choppers. Like, this is some proper slanderous shit. I'm gonna need some proof that they were wonton head choppers, because I guarantee they probably did chop some people's heads off, because there are people called clergy, oligarchs, fucking comprador bourgeoisie, landlords in general. A lot of them types of people ain't gonna go down too nicely, because they are direct exploiters of the most sort of fucking what's the word? They're the most brutal exploiters you get in the system. These people who dominate it, that benefit the most from it. So when they're removing imperialism, and they're also trying to remove capitalism because they're a communist movement and they're doing a revolution, Caleb, if you know what that is, they may have to do some things that ain't too the nice. I don't know if you've read Engels on the position of, if it could be peaceful, we'd like that, but it's not gonna be, because you want to change the system in a way that is fundamentally against the system. They ain't gonna let you do that. Like, what do you think? You think, like, what, you doing some H.G. Wells? Think we can get another Roosevelt in and we'll move towards socialism, guys? You should read or listen to the audiobook on Marxist-Leninist theory. The interview between H.G. Wells and Stalin, where Stalin laughs at him for fucking turning around and saying that fucking Roosevelt's gonna bring revolution to America. He finds it funny because it's naive and an obvious projection that an obvious an obvious projection of the interests of revolution onto the counter-revolutionaries, which is a typical operation of those in the labor aristocracy and the petty bourgeoisie that want to manipulate things like Marxism into fascism. The old red-brown pipeline. It has nothing to do with ideology. Stalin's right. There's no such thing as horseshoe theory. It has everything to do with class. Class interests drive ideological principles. These people who divulged from Marxism into fascism never had true Marxist principles. And if they did, they allowed them to be eroded by their class interests. Class interest, small principle. That's why Lenin said that the petty bourgeois and the aristocracy of labor has to commit class suicide. They have to commit to the proletariat and their interests. But the interests of the petty bourgeoisie are contradictory to the interests of socialism. Engels also said this as well. And Gramsci goes into further detail on this and basically cites that if the petty bourgeoisie lead the revolution's doomed. Fucked. For good.
I mean, imagine being a leftist in Peru.
And I must also add as well, the Peruvian Maoists, vast majority of them were from the native population. That's where they had the most success organizing. You know where they got the biggest challenge? Was from the white Spaniard settlers.
On the one hand, you know, you've got this crazy ultra leftist group that goes around killing leftists. Long live Presidente Gonzalo, blah, 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 and murders trade union activists. And then on the other hand, the government uses.
Please cite a source before you just blurt shit like that out.
That to set up a fascist state, and then they kill trade union activists. So the left of Peru, as a result of what the Shining Path did, was crushed. It was just crushed. It was being attacked by ultra leftists. It was being attacked by the government that used the fear of the ultra leftists to set up a military dictatorship. It was awful. Socialism comes by bringing millions of people into motion.
I mean, this is coming from a guy who will show respect and sit on a panel with Action Francais. Like, Dugan is bad. That's bad. Action Francais, that's something else, man. People who were willing to work with the Nazis and help them with the fucking Holocaust. Not a good people to be balling around with, mate. Dugan is problematic. That is just fucking fascistic. A French monarchist organization that helped with the Holocaust.
And building a coalition, a popular front.
And do I have to cite that a fucking shit ton more people died in World War II than ever died in Peru in their fucking war?
Of labor unionists, of peasants, of workers, community organizations. It doesn't come by blowing shit up and engaging in left adventurism. And these people, that is fantasy. That, like, the revolution happens because I like...
Okay, I'm going to quote Kwame Ture here. Pacifism is a tactic, not a principle. Because, principally, if one is forever always going to do things. Oh no, sorry, not pacifism, because I mean pacifism has been redefined to mean non-violence. It doesn't actually mean that. It means not only reacting when necessary. Non-violence is a tactic, not a principle. You could argue that being principally pacifistic by the way Jesus put it long ass time ago, it would be non-violence as a tactic, not a principle, because pacifism, you're supposed to strike when you are under attack, like it's defensive principality. But the non-violence, I'm butchering the quote. I'm starting with it here just in case people might get a bit confused while we're rambling. So there's Kwame Ture quote, non-violence is a tactic, not a principle. For as a principle, it leaves one in a position where they will end up dead. They won't be able to push their ideas. They'll either end up dead or betraying them. And at the end of the day, you can only be non-violent to a certain point when brothers and sisters are dying on the street. Non-violence is a tactic, not a principle. Because principally, you got to be ready when non-violence doesn't work to be lobbing hand grenades. That's the way Kwame Ture worded it. And Irish radicals have put it that way before, and many other people. It's that struggle is going to happen regardless. If you're in an anti-colonial movement, you're in a working class movement, and you're pushing for your rights, and they come at you with guns, and they come to shoot you, what are you going to do? They come at you, because at the end of the day, they got the police, they got the military, they got the state institutions. They have everything on their side. What do we have? We have each other, and we have our organizations. That's what we have. But the strength of them rely on our principles to understand that we must be ready to defend ourselves. The Black Panthers chose a panther. Why? Because the panther only strikes out in defense when it is cornered and incapable to escape. The system has already cornered the proletariat, and he's even more so cornered the lumpen proletariat. And colonized people and the lumpen proletariat are the most cornered people in the first world. especially those whom are colonized within the first world, the fourth worlders. The fax machine noises. Well, there's a comment. Yeah, he's sounding decidedly Trotskyist. Is accusing quote Sendero Luminoso unquote of murdering trade unionists. They used to accuse any left organization of doing this all the time. Aye, that sounds absolutely fucking right. Because it's all about purveying this idea that people are ultra leftists and they're going around just being equatable to fascists, when this is a guy who will turn around and I guarantee you will defend the social democratic government that came before the revolution there. When that's a social democratic government, social democracy is the moderate wing of fascism. That's fucking, these people like to quote Stalin all the time to defend their bullshit, but they won't talk about quotes like that. That spooks them a bit too much. But okay, we got a bit of a bogey there, man.
I organize a bunch of, poor people that are like gangsters, and we get guns and we like shoot people. That's what like this. What is his name? Left. What is it? What is his name? I didn't even remember his name. One of these doofuses who's attacked.
You see that? He knew his name and he just tried to pretend to forget it. You hear the disingenuity in his tone. Like, Caleb, if you're gonna do lies, learn how to lie. You're really bad at it.
Poor people that are like gangsters, and we get guns and we like shoot people. That's what like this. What is his name?
And you see that? The gangsters, like fucking
Left.
He's being right down the alley of racial stereotypical nonsense. Fucking, this is a way white play bourgeois and labor aristocrat people look down on the lumpen proletariat, especially in America. In America, people in the lumpen proletariat in America are seen as what's it? Well, they're seen as people who are black. That's typically like it. And then they go from there. They don't see like criminalized elements because of poverty. The first thing they typically see is because of the racist purview that's put over themselves, and the fact that a lot of them want to see things that way because it suits their class interests, Caleb, is that they see it as black. And then they see anyone who's in that class position as trying to be black. When actually, an interesting thing that I was told by a black lumpen comrade is that most rap music that's centered around white people pretending to be black is actually most popular in the middle class. At least that's coming from America. I don't know whether that pays here because I don't have very many middle class friends. They typically don't stay around a lot when you start talking about communism. There's a weird thing about that. But the nonetheless, that's who that music is said to typically appeal to from an American perspective, which is the country where those racial contradictions in the first world are at its highest. British and American culture have a lot of similarities, so it wouldn't surprise me if it comes over. If the tendency is the same overseas, just with a different retrospect. We don't have a massive bulk of population who descend from slave owners compared to them, like because most of our slave trade was around the actual big slave. Because most people who ever owned slaves here, they owned 1 or 2 or 3 indentured servants. I'm not saying it was a good thing. Don't fucking get that wrong. But it was what made different relations to the situation here. It's also what has made it a lot harder for African people in the British diaspora to organize struggle, and has made it a lot easier for the racists in Britain to squash down their struggles. Actually, in the last sort of 30, 40 years, especially from the BBC, but from a lot of media organizations in Britain, they've done all they can to whitewash and basically rid of the history of the black liberation and civil rights struggle that happened in the UK in the 70s and the 80s. But while those contradictions hold a somewhat different sentiment to the majority of the population. The relationship has still existed and still holds a historical character, and Britain has its own kind of racism regarding the way we look at people anyway, that America also ascribes to more than ever could be. And that's our Victorian humanism, where we see everything as either uncivilized or things that we civilized. Like that's the British perspective of the world. Either we did it or they're not there yet. Or they're French. That's the third option. But the and before anyone mentions that the Spanish exist, the Spanish are just French people that kick donkeys off tower blocks. But the what's it? See, this is European solidarity. But the I haven't got to the Germans yet, but I'll leave them be, because all I have to say is fucking something about what's it? One of the world wars that normally gets them fucking pissed off. And what's it? Offend the British? Well, bunch of fucking what's it? Pond lurkers, aren't we? Bunch of fucking inbred French Germans trying to pretend to be Britons, or whatever the fuck we like to call ourselves these days. Oh, and we've committed probably the most amount of genocide the world has ever seen. America is a microcosm of the British Empire. Or well, it's a macrocosm now, but it was originally a microcosm of the British Empire. I mean, within its borders, actually. So I will rescind that. Within its borders, America is a microcosm of the British Empire. You get a bit of everything. Caleb is doing the exact opposite what an actual Marxist-Leninist should be doing. He's reaching out to conservative, middle-class, petty bourgeois Karens while giving the finger to the lowest masses. Absolutely, brother, absolutely. Let's see what else this fucking dipshite has to say.
What is it? What is his name? I didn't even remember his name. You know, one of these doofuses who's attacking me. It's like he thinks the lumpen proletariat are revolutionary because he's got this like gun fantasy, and he wants to make everybody poor.
He's got this gun fantasy. Oh my. Caleb, have you read the Panthers? What do you think they went on about how they were an organization of defense? Because they had to make sure that they were, you know, they were putting out their positions as obviously as possible, because to defend themselves against the mass mistreatment that they were going through from the feds was to be armed. That's what they did. They organized together. They said, no one black man can just arm himself and feel safe. That ain't going to work. We got to get together, and we got to be public about it, and we got to be standing together in solidarity and pushing together. They go, why did they have to do that? Because otherwise, brothers and sisters would be dying on the streets or getting thrown into prison for lousy sentences that range from months to decades. Hell, there's Panthers only just coming out of prison now. Like, I think the most recent release was I think it was either months ago or a year or two ago. I can't remember. I'm terrible with specific dates of things, but I remember hearing that they're still being, you know, they're still trickling them out today, and there's still people in prison today. There's people who are on life sentences. There are people waiting for death row. I mean, death row is literally a fucking queue for the death sentence, because they've given that many people the death penalty. They can't kill them quick enough. America is what happens when you have a successful experiment of Nazism. That's what it is. Settler colonialism, Lebensraum, Manifest Destiny. Absolute horrific abomination created by the British, the French, and the Spanish. It never should have come to existence, and it's predominantly the British that created it. Then the French had a lot of influence, and the Spanish influence more comes from the US dominating Spain later, but nonetheless, The US empire took notes from any empire it could. And fuck me, when the Nazis took notes from them and did their thing, the US then took notes from the Nazis. I mean, it's like that old meme where it has the people copying each other, and it's like the Nazis copying the US over their shoulders, and then the US copying the Nazis over their shoulders. And the US was copying the British, which the Nazis were also based on a lot of stuff off. I mean, the death camp, for one, was based off of the British concentration camps, where we used to just ram people in and starve them to death. A lot of the time, not even getting them to produce labor. It was just cram them in, cage them up, and let them die. Because it was cheaper than shooting them.
Right? He likes the lockdowns because it's making people poor, and that'll like make him more revolutionary, man.
No, do you know why lockdowns were really fucking useful? I don't care what anyone else thinks. You know why they're useful? Because if we did an actual proper lockdown, not these flash lockdowns, fuck arounds, lie to people before it was here that it's just the flu, and then when it gets here and we realize it ain't just the flu, you fucking panic the shit out of everyone. You know, you could have leveled this off easy, told them what it was at first, don't put them in doubt, put a lockdown in before it even properly got here, dealt with the problem, let it fade off, and then we wouldn't be having it normalize into our ecosystem. Because that's the problem is, if we just start using what is actually a periodic vaccine, which is already making the whole situation as lousy as the way they deal with the flu, which, you know, back when the flu was normalized, that was an unavoidable situation. We weren't as experienced with what we know about pandemics then, but even then, we still did a better fucking quarantine than we did in this situation. Fucking, you know, if we did a proper lockdown, the virus could have faded, died off, and we could go back to normal. The only reason it's not fucking, you know, all these people are having to lose their jobs, lose money, and get fucked is because we live in a system where people have to make profits all the time and want to make profits all the time and won't rescind them profits. So when people are needing to actually do a proper lockdown, these businesses are unwilling, are at best begrudging, to pay people a proper decent amount of money for them to survive while they're not at work, so they can do a lockdown and people can just live their lives during a lockdown and survive, get the food they need, essentials and all that stuff. Because what you do then, because there's a thing, if there's a load of jobs that don't need to be done during a lockdown, let's say like all these sports shops and other crap like that, or a lot of tech shops, all this, that, and the other, all these luxury things, holiday resorts, places like that. If these places are going to be closed down and those workers are temporary on leave, and you got an essential work system, why not county to county, you work some out between the people who can work but are having to be off work because of the situation, and cycle the service industry that has to be on, the essential industries of service, like food and deliveries and other stuff like that. You cycle the workforces and ensure everyone is paid a decent amount of money that allows them to get through, who is a worker, so it covers their asses. And then you do a proper lockdown. Because then not only can you do a proper lockdown, but you're also not stressing the fuck out of service workers who have essential jobs, like having to have them work ridiculously around the clock to cater to people's panic during a lockdown. You can have a cycle of work that allows people to properly keep themselves in proper health, both stress-wise and avoiding the corona-wise, because the percentage of them being in a position where they can get the corona is greatly reduced. With that use of the workforce, you can more effectively organize deliveries without overloading the delivery system. So therefore, you can keep more people out of the shops as well, decrowding the systems, less people standing in really long queues, coughing on each other. There was a process that could have been done, but capitalism can't do it because the workforce is too rigid. In a socialist system, you can move the workforce in any direction it is needed to be moved, because the workforce is not gonna fucking lose their livelihood in a situation like that. They'll be catered for by a worker-controlled state. But no, lockdowns, you're just trying to ruin everyone's life. Fuck off.
It's like, this is childish thinking, has nothing to do with Marxism. This is Blanquism. This is Punchism. This
Blockieism. What does he mean by blockieism?
is ultra leftist. You know, you never support.
Is that his way of saying, like, disagreeing with brothers on the block or something? It's not an ideology. It's a fucking principle of organization. We should seek to the brothers of the block, people of the lowest sector. And it's really, it's the brothers and the sisters of the block. Let's not forget about our sisters. One criticism I'll have of that label is should be brothers and sisters of the block. They meant that anyway, because there was plenty of sisters in the Black Panthers Party that held strong roles.
Making life worse for the working class. And bad situations on there.
We do have a big problem with male chauvinism in literally every Marxist movement that's existed.
Their own don't lead to revolution. If a bad situation comes and it just makes life worse, but there's no mass proletarian organization to lead resistance, it actually just demoralizes people. Communists don't want everyone's wages to go down. Communists don't want, you know, schools in working class neighborhoods to close. Communists don't want, you know, the roads to start crumbling. Communists don't want life to get bad for the working class.
Yeah, but we also don't want to prop up the capitalist system. Caleb, you constantly go on, like, are you representing all this, that about struggle? When I criticized you about not mentioning Eugene Debs enough, you stopped quoting him without saying his name and started actually mentioning his name and you know, not sniping his quotes, but you still avoid one really big point about Eugene Debs that makes him so much better than you. Eugene Debs is not a sewer socialist. What did Eugene Debs define as sewer socialists? Sewer socialists were socialists that were more bothered on fixing sewers within the system itself than they were on just removing the system that made the society that way in the first place. Sticking band-aids on a broken system rather than building a new one. That is what a sewer socialist is, and that is what you are. No, we don't want conditions to get bad for the proletariat and the lumpen proletariat. But they do, because that's who the system strikes against. Guys go on about, the labor aristocracy, the middle class is falling. No, do you know what class is actually falling into poverty? The proletariat, they're the ones who fall into poverty. The ones who fall into the lumpen proletariat, more than anything, end up being the proletariat, not the labor aristocracy or the petty bourgeoisie. So fuck out of here with that fucking bullshit. You're a petty bourgeois scandal. And why don't you put on a goddamn suit?
Because if things get bad and there's no mass movement of resistance and there's no vanguard that can lead people in struggle, it only demoralizes things. And furthermore, left adventurism and terrorism is not how revolutions happen. Revolutions are based on working people in their millions, mobilizing, building combinations and coalitions to fight for what they want and asserting their power. And they do become violent when they have no choice. When the ruling class is looking to crush their peaceful democratic organizations, they have to.
We will seek revolution. That is our end goal. We'll always start off peaceful. That is how we organize amongst the people. But eventually, we have to take power. You're using a sitting on the fence thing to make a point that does not stand. There is no peaceful end to capitalism. We're dealing with a billionaire class with a military that goes around the world stomping anyone who tells them not to oppress them. Do you think you're just gonna tell them and they're gonna stop? Oh, please, daddy billionaires, don't oppress us anymore. That's not gonna work. Ever. Engels' point on it was, you can try. It ain't gonna happen. No, they're never gonna just hand over the system to you. Can you get a majority of the people on your side? Possibly. That's the hope. But even when you don't, doesn't mean everyone's gonna fucking always be your enemy in the end. But fascists and class collaborators in general, neo-feudalists, they always will be. The reactions of liberalism will be dealt with in time as the revolution presses on. The reactions of fascism will be stomped out. Liberalism has no chance of surviving in the fields of revolution. It becomes very little purview. There becomes two dominating factions in a revolutionary situation that take up everything. Look to Germany during the 20s and when the Nazis then come to power. Ordoliberalism had no chance of beating fascism, had no chance of beating communism. And that's why you saw ordoliberalism take a shit ton of notes from fascism. Actually, a lot of the people who re-brought back ordoliberalism, which is neoliberalism, by the way, for those who don't know, ordoliberalism into Germany in the 50s, West Germany, were Nazi party members. They took a lot of notes from fascism. That's why there's a lot of influence from fascism on neoliberalism. It's just the difference, the main difference. There's a lot of nuances, but the core difference is that fascism is more, fascism is more integrated with the corporate sector. Like it has great, like the government has a greater sense of control over how it organizes the corporate sector. I mean, the government always has greater control if it implements those policies, but you need a bit of billionaire backing to hope you don't get couped. So fascism had a solidified class collaborative effort between the labor aristocracy, petty bourgeoisie, and the bourgeoisie, and then obviously included a mass amount of the proletariat too. Because class collaborationism is the position of neo-feudalism and fascism. And in this environment, in this struggle, this is what this motherfucker is preaching. He is preaching for class collaborationism. What do you say in this video?
To defend themselves. But you know, ultra-left.
And also to turn around and make a fence post sit to try and call us ultra-leftists when we preach the same position the Panthers preach is, to be honest, horribly liberal of you. Like, this is the type of liberal shit people will always throw at the Panthers back in the day when Black Power was going about. You had the white liberal, non-violence movement that was turning around and calling them all this, that, and the other, and accusing them of being violent and equating them to the white supremacists that were gunning down innocent black men, women, and children. You know, they were doing the same thing, trying to tout them as aggressors when they were defenders. You're doing the same thing. And heck, we're only defending their principles. We're not even in that position. I'm in fucking Britain. I don't even have that capacity. But you'll go and slander. I mean, because you are talking about leftism today as an American. You'll go and slander Americans on their right to defend themselves. And slander communists on their right to organize a defense of oppressed groups. What does that make you, Caleb? Full of shit.
Adventurism has always led to what it led to in Peru, isolating the revolutionaries from the masses, enabling the capitalist state to have a huge crackdown and suppress the revolutionaries. Serious organizers and revolutionaries do not advocate left adventurism and terrorism. You know, and the idea that we want life to get worse for the broad masses.
They're in a fucking colony. It's not just about fucking, the revolution itself. It's also about a decolonization movement. And to just call that adventurism is deeply offensive. Heck, this is the geezer who supports sanctions on the DPRK. He defends China and Russia putting sanctions on the DPRK because the DPRK doesn't follow the Proliferation Treaty. Neither does China and Russia. They still have nukes. China's building nukes as we speak. And if I remember rightly, wasn't the treaty fucking breached anyway? By the US and Russia like 4 years ago. So this guy doesn't. This guy has no respect for for a colonized group's right to defend itself. He has no respect for it.
And they'll be like, violence, man, and the idea that the lumpen proletariat, the desperately poor and criminalized elements, that basically are pushed to the margins of society and are so desperately poor they'll work for anybody, that's who we should be organizing, not average work.
We're desperately poor, will work for anybody. Fuck you, you piece of shit. Doesn't know anyone who's fucking lumpen proletariat. They scare him too much. He crosses the road when he sees anyone who has anything that's got a fucking rip in it. No more than if it's dirty. He don't know shit about the streets. Coming around here, there are plenty of people who will have to do work, and sometimes have to do any work that comes by them. Heck, I've been in a situation back when I was living in a shared house, living with a scouser, and anytime he offered me a job, yeah, I would go about and do it because it was a bit of work. I don't mind. It wasn't anything too dodgy. The only dodgiest thing that ever was that he'd fucking nicked a few things from fucking construction site for him to sell, and I helped him cut it down. I don't give a shit. Are you really gonna cry about some capitalist who lost some fucking money because a scouser decided to use his intuition and make himself some pennies? Fuck you. Guy's on his ass. He might be a lumpen aristocrat and might be in a much better off position than I am because of that. But he was still on his ass. He was still in the same material conditions, relatively speaking. Bit complicated, the relationship between the lumpen proletariat and the lumpen aristocracy, that I'm not going to go into here because they're big talking for ages. But nevertheless, do people do what I have to do? I get jobs to do money. Do you think there's no integrity in the way people operate in that? Like across the board? You don't know what you're talking about. There are plenty of people who won't do X or won't do Y because it's indignifying. For example, like, I won't even do this from the lumpen proletarian position. I'll defend the lumpen aristocracy here. A lot of people in the lumpen aristocracy who are weed dealers, you'll never see them sell smack because that's unprincipled to them, or a lot of the time it's like entirely any drug that sorry, I think I had a fly just land in my eye. Oh yeah, they won't want to sell any drug that will kill a man or fuck their life over in a massive way. So they just stick to selling things like marijuana. That's a common principle held by them people. A lot of stoners in the lumpen proletariat as well. You'll always hear them say, "You'll never see me do any other this, that, or the other," and not all the time because they're discriminatory to it. Although we do have a problem of stoners in general being a bit discriminatory to people who do harder drugs. A lot of the time, it's just principles they hold because they find those situations indignifying. And you know what? Not everyone who goes to those indignifying positions are indignifying people. I know plenty of people who have to go down to the worst of drugs. Do you know why? Because they suffer with disabilities. They suffer with struggles. They're going to take the most horrible of things because they got no support. Especially in a place like America. Like, you're in absolute agonizing pain and you can't get healthcare support because you're not loaded with cash. You're gonna be addicted to opiates, or you're gonna be addicted to speed, or you're gonna be addicted to ecstasy or meth. You're gonna take one of them drugs that really does take away the pain and the anguish. And it's why I always say you shouldn't disrespect someone just because of the grounds of which they have to walk. They have to walk a ground that's somewhat criminal or entirely criminal. Ask why rather than just defaming them. And to think that those people can't be organized is ridiculous. And do you know who else was also a criminal element? The Bolshevik Party. Fucking hell. Like, what are you going to say, Stalin, to Stalin, Caleb, about him robbing banks and robbing trains to fund the revolution? Oh no, he's just a horrible criminal. Yet he's seen as a saint by many Orthodox churches in the East, well, specifically in Russia, and Georgia. and he's one of the most popular people in the country to this day because, you know, the era that he coalesced with was the golden era of development, the industrial period of the Soviet Union when it mapped itself on the world, and then social imperialism took over. Fucking now we're here, and no big socialist country left. Although it's been like that since the 80s, really. I don't know what the fuck is going on with my eye, man.
Working class people who want a better life. This is all just an ultra leftist deviation that serves the ultra rich, right? Louis Bonaparte, if you actually read where, you know, Karl Marx talked about the definition of the lumpen proletariat, he talked about how Louis Bonaparte built an army of desperately poor people, the Society of December 10th, to beat down the rest of the working class, to beat down his enemies in the capitalist class, and stabilize capitalism.
How many hundreds of years ago was this? And here's the thing. This is the way people are organized in general. Sectors of the working class are organized like this. This is nothing new. If, you know, the logic that is held by people like Mao, people like Franz Fanon, people like U.P. Newton, and many other great cadres, is that you organize these people so they're not organized against you. Maybe these people were organized because these people were disenfranchised by the very people who should be defending these groups. Like, how the fuck can you call yourself a defender of the lower class if you're going to turn around and say that some people are too poor for you to defend? That is an absolute contradiction. It's an abstraction. This is fucking this is utter bonkers logic. The lumpen will only become a, quote, dangerous class, end quote, if shitheads like Caleb continue to swipe them aside and let the bourgeoisie try and organize them. Absolutely. Because they watch this shit happen. Especially the petty bourgeoisie are the ones who will do this. They watch it happen and they organize the lumpen for the bourgeoisie. Mussolini is a good example of this. He did this. And so did the Nazis. But before any of these groups had a standing amongst the lumpen proletariat, they had to get a standing amongst the aristocracy. Mussolini had a greater advantage than Hitler because Mussolini was once a communist, supposedly. I mean, well, you know, how true he was to those principles is questionable, but he was the guy who translated Das Kapital and I think a few other of Marx's selected works into fucking Italian. And Lenin actually praised Mussolini at one point.
And that's a trick that since the time of the Roman Empire, you've had this. The Gracchi brothers and others, Bonapartist figures, will mobilize the desperately poor and marginal, build an army of them to beat down the rest of society in order to stabilize capitalism. This guy hates FDR. He hates FDR. It's like, you know, it's like basically the lumpen are utilized to do what FDR did. He stabilized capitalism with reforms. So, you know, and FDR did a lot of good progressive stuff.
You see how he's like, shit, I just said FDR's a bad thing. I quickly got to step it back and make it sound like FDR's a good thing because they criticize FDR, but FDR did what they want to do. But you're wanting to push what FDR wanted to do. That's what's going on inside his brain as he's doing this. Is he fucking... his brain cycles through shite and arse and everything in between that, because you just turned around and said the point that I've made about FDR. FDR's a fascist. Kaiserism, Bonapartism, whatever the word you want to use for it, is what is the backbone to fascism. Mussolini prided himself on his Kaiserism, and you called for the need for a Kaiser in America on your time to tell you about our new national holiday, where we will all pray to Lincoln. You know, you want to decolonize, so you're going to put a symbol of a guy who wanted to deport the people of deport the people back to Africa. Not in any respectful manner, just deport them to a coast in Africa and dump them there. Like, Lincoln didn't fucking free the slaves because he liked them in any way. He freed them because he was forced by the turn of history, because slave rebellions kept cropping up. But you're going to watch him give credit to white people instead. But he then quickly backtracks to say this, and this is...
It's like basically the lumpen are utilized to do what FDR did. He stabilized capitalism with reforms. So, and FDR did a lot of good progressive stuff because he was aligning with the Soviet Union. And that again, these people, they have an analysis where it's like, is this person a communist or not?
He did good things because he sided with the Soviet Union. This sounds like no, my little brother would make a stronger take than this. And my little brother's still in high school, like early years of high school. We don't have a middle school like Britain, so high school isn't as old as all the Americans are thinking. You're thinking I'm being really ageist now because I'm saying someone between 16 and 8. No, my little brother's like, he's 14 now, just turned 14. But yeah, my little brother would make a stronger take about about the relationship between America and the Soviet Union than that, and he doesn't know anything about the Soviet Union. You asked him what the Soviet Union is, he wouldn't know. I don't even think my little brother knows that it's what that Russia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Ukraine, Georgia and all those, Tajikistan and all that lot were part of the Soviet Union. I'm not trying to shame him or anything. I'm just saying, like, this is some proper, like, microwave brain take that I expect from someone who's under the age of 10. Roosevelt was good because he had Stalin's phone number. And, he must have really stiffened Stalin's sausage to get his phone number.
It's like, these people attack me for supporting Lincoln. Well, I don't support Lincoln because I think he was a communist.
Oh, wait, no.
But he entered an alliance with communists to defeat slavery.
I didn't see that other comment, actually. I don't see any other reason than opportunism to not engage with and organize the lumpen. They would be much easier than the petty bourgeoisie with lots to lose and live comfortably. Absolutely right, brother. Absolutely right. If you want to organize a struggle for the oppressed, you want to organize it around the oppressed. And I mean, also with our experience, we can command theory quite well when we're taught it. If we're actually capable, of being put in that position by the people who should be coming out to us and coming to us and being the teachers that learn. Because the thing is, with an aristocrat, they could be very useful if they were willing to not come in thinking they know it all first. They got to come in wanting to know what people think already and what people have experienced, to then not only learn from their experiences what the world is quite like in the lower class now, but also to create mannerisms to push towards their positions. I mean, some of the best works I've ever seen regarding speaking out to lumpen proletarians has come from colonized groups. From the from the revolution in China to the revolutionary movements across America from colonized groups of Native American and African descent. There's a lot to be learned about the positions these people have mapped around the Lumpen, and there's a lot of South American communists who talk a lot about the Lumpen bourgeoisie, especially considering the experiences of South American and Central American countries like Mexico, where they're dominated by US-backed drug cartels. And we got to remember as well, it's not just that they live comfortably. Their comfort is specifically tied to the war, the military-industrial complex and the imperialist system. For them to retain their class privilege, they have to defend the system. So they don't want to repeal imperialism. What Caleb wants is the Mosleyite-style imperialism that China has.
Slavery. That was good, right? And that
That
Lincoln
was
represents a
good.
progressive trend. And Lincoln was very heavily influenced by Marx. And there's loads of scholarship about represents to defeat slavery. That was good, right? And that Lincoln represents a progressive trend. And Lincoln was very heavily influenced by Marx. And there's loads of scholarship about.
Lincoln was very influenced by Marxism. Citation needed. Like, I don't remember Lincoln being heavily influenced by Marxism. I remember them having a little exchange and Marx being a bit too over emphatic about the guy. But nonetheless, watch this.
About August Willich and Joseph Wedemeyer and the role of Marxists in the Union Army, and how New York Tribune, the main Republican Party newspaper in New York City, hired Karl Marx as its London correspondent, and how it required a united front that the labor movement was part of, and included Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman, and how it was really the defeat of slavery in the United States was the Second American Revolution. These people don't know any of that. They just know, like, I like guns, man, and I like revolution. I'm gonna get a gun.
The first revolution wasn't revolutionary. So how was there a second one? This Eurocentric idea of colonialism is ridiculous. The Americans weren't the colonized. They were the colonizers. They were the British. They were the Spanish. They were the French. The colonized were the natives and the Africans. This whole, they're freeing themselves from feudal slavery is an over-romanticization of a struggle of the feudalists who were enslaving the people because they wanted to go their own path and develop capitalism their own way. The delayed choice quantum eraser double slit experiment proves idealism. What? Are you defending the idea of idealism? Like, really? Come on, man. People have better things to do than be idealistic. Ooh. Fucking.
I'm going to get like gangsters and we're going to be like revolutionary, man. And I want everyone to be poor so they can become gangsters. And I mean, it's just the stupidest crap. These people are dumb. They're over.
See what I mean as well with this racist shit? Gangsters. He's being all fucking. Listen.
Gangsters. And I mean, it's just the revolutionary, man. And I want everyone to be poor so they can become gangsters. And I mean, it's just the stupidest crap.
That fucking rubs me so wrong, especially with how the lumpen proletariat in America is predominantly of colonized groups. Like, utter ignorance of dickheads like this is what ends up making it quite hard to organize amongst people like this, because when they hear shit like this and they hear that these people are like the real communists because they always constantly advertise themselves as that, people might take them at their word for it because it might be the only thing they've seen, and then it just turns them off. They're not going to want to fucking deal with someone like that who's turning around and slandering them because of the ways they have to live and struggle. No one's fantasizing over the situation that exists. We're analyzing the material conditions of the world that is as is, and having to come up with a platform to deal with that situation. That is what the philosophical science of Marxism likes to look at. Dialectical material and historical material analysis of the world that be, to look at the contradictions that exist, to see how we can move forward from the current crisis of humanity.
Crap. These people are dumb. They're overgrown teenagers. They're LARPing. Some of us are actually trying to save our country from what's happening right now. We see people in the United States who are starving, who have their relatives dying of opioids. We see the big line.
This motherfucker is turned around and just slandered the lumpen proletariat, and now he's trying to do a pity party for him. Do you know who the people who are dying on the streets of these things are? Fucking people who are dying from opiates. People who are dying because they've not got food, because they've not got shelter. Those people are lumpen proletarians, you piece of shit. You can't turn around and discriminate these people and then play a pity party for them and separate this class so you can advertise criminalization of the disenfranchised working class. It's disgusting.
Outside of Catholic charities, we see the people who, I mean, capitalism is destroying America right now. And we're not going to defeat it by going, yeah, I want to be a gangster. We're going to defeat it by building real organizations.
Okay. I've been pushing that what we should be doing is getting organized into groups, conglomerating what we can amongst us as comrades, fund-wise, to get bundles of as much food to make food bags that have a set amount of different things out, depending on the size of the household they're being given to, and begin food projects, begin education projects, community outreach and aid programs. What you're stating, Caleb, has never been advertised by any of us. It reminds me of the same blatantly over-exaggerated and offensively racist mannerisms that were used against the Black Panther Party.
Organizing the broad masses of people, building a real coalition of people, united, who don't agree on everything, to fight for economic rights. That's how we're going to win, right? And we're going to win, and we're going to work with people we disagree.
Caleb, you're the one who judges your friendships based on whether you agree on a polemic or not. You know, it's about making cadres. Friends is something that we can make if we are compatible as friends, but if we're not, I'm not going to turn around and say, oh, I can't relate to you or work to you. I could hate you personally, but that doesn't mean I shouldn't work with someone I hate because I have some personal grievance, unless that personal grievance disrupts their moral character, their principles, the way that they operate as a person to other people, because obviously that is important to communist principles. I won't deal with someone who mistreats people, but at the end of the day, if I don't like a part of someone's character, I gotta keep that, keep that out of my fucking politics. My politics must be about the fact that people who want to organize and help the people, we got to organize and help the people. Otherwise, that we're dickheads.
With, and we're going to talk about how we don't want to make life worse in America. We want to make life better. And we are going to talk about how only socialism can save America, how imperialism is responsible. Imperialism is responsible for the crisis. The same big banks and multinational corporations that are destroying the lives of American workers are also waging wars overseas and keeping countries around the world poor. We're going to build an anti-imperialist united front among the broad masses of people. That's how it works, all right? And you want to do this, you have this fantasy that you're never actually going to do. You're just going to sit in your apartment and you're going to sit in your home and LARP on the internet and pretend you're Presidente Gonzalo. You're never going to do anything. And you have this fantasy that you're going to, I'm going to run around with a gun, man. I'm so badass. Grow up. Like, some of us are serious about this. Some of us are building real organizations, and you're being a child and you're LARPing, and it might be more fun on social media. And I mean, who knows? Maybe if you keep doing it and you get, better production values, you can get some sexy costumes, more people will watch you, but it's not fucking serious. It's child's play. It's stupid. It has nothing to do.
Yeah. I'm looking to get, like your closest ally has goes around dressing up in costumes and saying that he wants to pave the road with the skulls of his enemies. Like, you're really preaching from that moral high ground. A guy who sides with someone who calls empires of the East of old, like, socialist. Like, that is the pinnacle of someone who's fascist. Who's like, oh no, the old traditional ways of feudalism. That was the ways of socialism. No, that's neo-feudalism. Engels literally fucking talks about it in Socialism, Scientific or Utopian. The petty bourgeois socialists, or what we nowadays call petty bourgeois radicals, want to implement neo-feudalism under the guise of socialism. You ratty little fuck.
With real revolutionary organizing and the real Marxist movement. It's juvenile behavior, and ultimately it serves the ultra-rich because you're helping mobilize against the working people who are trying to defend their communities from the economic downfall of the lockdowns. You're mobilizing people against Russia and supporting their war drive against Russia, demonizing Russia and China, which is exactly the same. So your LARP, your live action role play, your fantasy game where you're a gangster, you support the lumpen man and you hate white workers because they're a bunch of square. This fantasy that you're doing is
no one has said that we hate white workers. Citation needed.
Serving the imperialists, and it's preventing a real broad working class united front from actually emerging. So I'm tired of this shit. I'm really, really tired of it. I'm really tired of it. Go and watch my keynote speech. It was posted last night, very early in the AM. My keynote speech from the Center for Political Innovation Conference. In front of a statue of Lincoln, I talked about who is really harming American working people, how the future of the American working class is standing with Russia and China and Cuba and Venezuela against Wall
Doesn't say the DPRK here.
Wall Street, and how we're going to revive the traditions of class unity, anti-racism,
class unity, but hear this, because he's not saying working class unity, so he just said class unity.
Imperialism, working class power. We need a government of action to fight for working families against the big banks and corporations. That is the revolutionary Marxist approach. It's not your child's play. It's not your LARP. It's not your teenage fantasy. It's about building actual working class power. It's about bringing people who don't agree with each other on things like abortion and gay marriage together to stand in solidarity against the big banks and corporations, against their great reset that's driving people into poverty. It's about becoming the champions of the people, not celebrating when people get poorer, not saying, oh, I like lockdowns, it leads to wrecking the economy, that makes people poor, and then we can do gangsta shit. Shut the fuck up, right? Communists are champions of the people.
Caleb, swallow your own words. Please, shut the fuck up, drop out the movement, go back to just being a news presenter.
People. Whenever a capitalist boss drives down the wages of workers, we're against it. Whenever.
Yeah, and how long did it take for any of you guys to even mention the Amazon strikes? Actually, before you even mentioned them, one of your closest allies turned around and said that unions, they discriminated against unions. I'm all the way in the fucking UK, and I mentioned the Amazon strikes before you. There was not much noise for you on the steel worker strikes or the mine worker strikes last year. So what the fuck are you talking about, lad? Please. Fucking bastard. I'll fucking get you. Fucking flies.
A capitalist boss gets us into a new war. I don't care if you don't like Putin or you don't like China. We're against it. We never support the capitalists in their wars. Revolutionary defeatism means standing against your own bourgeoisie and welcoming the defeat of imperialism, of your imperialist bourgeoisie, welcoming their defeat and standing for the defeat of imperialism.
We need to stand for the defeat of all empires, though. So you don't do that by standing for the other empire. That is like reverse Kautsky moment. Like, you don't turn around and start supporting the other empire, like the victim nation. Like that's what Kautskyites would do about Russia back in the day. Oh no, Russia! Oh no, they don't meet this, that, the other. Oh, no. Lenin got into this with his position on Lenin and the split in imperialism, the Marxist split in imperialism. He talks about how people muddy the waters on everything so that they can either side with their own national bourgeoisie or create a victim out of another nation that is also imperialist. That these people don't want an end to empire. That's why Lenin turned around and lost faith in Western Europe, because the labor aristocracy and petty bourgeoisie were too strong in that region.
I mean, these people have no idea what they're talking about. They're playing stupid, childish games. They're speaking in the name of Marxism, and it annoys the crap out of me. It really annoys the crap out of me. Go and read what Karl Marx wrote about Lincoln. Did he write, Lincoln's not a communist, so he's...
Oh, Karl Marx said it, so it's good. That's not how it works. That Marx said that. Marx said that's not how it works. People who just dogmatize things are not Marxists. If something he said is proven wrong, especially by a greater perspective of historical materialism than Marx had, which I must clarify we have today, because back in the 1800s, you didn't have this access to literature and media that we have today. We are in a much wider access to these materials in this day and age. It's not the fucking 1800s anymore. So Marx's positions on Lincoln and the American Civil War are going to be out of date. They are going to likely be wrong, just like a lot of Marx's ideas have been wrong and have been proven wrong by upcoming future Marxists and other people of socialist struggle. So the line in the sand here is ridiculous. Oh, Marx said it. And what's the material conditions and historical material relations that relatively prove that point? Because if you can prove the point and it has standing, that's something else. But if you're just going to talk bollocks, you're just talking bollocks. Oh, well, Marx said this. Oh, well, you've got no context. You just dropped quotes out of your arsehole. I don't care where Marx sticks his tongue and how much poo he wants to get on it before he decides to change his mind. But the end of the fucking day, I ain't no fucking brown nose. And I ain't going to turn around and go, oh, well, yeah, I'm a Marxist, Leninist, Maoist, all this. I'm just going to follow what they said or what they did or what... Yeah, fuck off. That's not how it works. Not a dogma. It's a philosophy that drives science to better the lives of the people.
Idiot. No, that is not what Lincoln wrote, or that's not what Marx wrote about Lincoln. Marx wrote that Lincoln was the single-minded son of the working class, rescuing an enchained race. He wrote about how the coalition to defeat the slaveholders included the working men of Europe who refused to pick cotton from that was picked by slaves. That the working men of Europe, if they brought a delivery of cotton to their textile mill that came from the South, the workers of London, who were organized by Karl Marx, would refuse to unload it and refuse to work with it in this textile mill because they said that would be scabbing on the black people of America that want to be free. They organized workers in London to refuse.
But this was direct worker action that would have happened regardless. This wasn't because Marx and Lincoln were touching tips. This is because it was the right thing to do during that struggle. Why aren't you going on about what the American workers were doing? I mean, there's great people like John Brown who did some good shit. But what was the majority of the white Americans doing to black people in this time? I know about the mass lynchings. Do you know about the mass lynchings, Caleb? Do I have to go and talk about the mass lynchings? And how it wasn't just poor white it wasn't just rich white Americans that were lynching people. There was a lot of poor white Americans that were lynching black people. Just the one-ton murder of native people. Any land that any one man wanted, it was a white man would just go and seize that land from native people with guns. They'd get a posse together, they'd seize the land, and they'd split the land between the posse that they got together and start themselves a farm. And given the fact that slavery still existed in those regions, because the most likely place they're kicking natives off their land is going to be in the South, those people will go and then start a plantation. A lot of those, the majority of people who were doing the manifest destiny didn't just appear in the South. They did come from the East. Any person in America who is a Southerner was once an Easterner, because it used to be the 13 colonies. And, you know, a lot of the positions around the white states, because I mean, it was the government in DC that actually made a deal with the slavers to ensure that slavery was defended. And a lot of the people, you know, so when slavery was ended in the North, a lot of those people in the northern regions then deported slaves into the South, like freed slaves. They deported them into the South because they wanted white ethnostates. Like, America's no hoaxy pokesy fucking thing where nice stuff happened. He even mentions it, that Lincoln didn't free them because he wanted to. It was because they forced his hand. But he makes it out that the white people forced his hand. The Marxists forced his hand. What forced his hand was the same thing that forced every capitalist country's hand, was the rise of slave rebellion. Rise of slave rebellion. That's what forced the system's hand. Solidarity from white people is always going to be helpful, because it's great for them to actually show solidarity and learn and break away from whiteness and actually respect the fact that white and black are denotations that were made by the British and the Spanish, and learn that it's not our cultural character, and come to make great alliances with these people. That is great fucking work. And not stepping on any of their struggles and letting them direct their future as a right of self-determination, and supporting that always is going to be a helpful thing to do. But does that make up the majority? History certainly disagrees. Because if we look to history, racism not only has continued, but in a lot of cases, worsened in many areas, especially during the segregation period. Nonetheless, there's just a massive pattern in history of the continuation of racism, and it stretching into the white working class. They're not exempt from it. We got to try and convince people away from it, but the white working class in America lives in a settler colonial country that bases its core culture off of racism and genocide and land theft, slavery. So, of course, a majority of them are going to follow those principles. You don't wash those principles away by, you don't wash those principles away by Taylorism, via Taylorism. That don't work. You get rid of those principles by challenging them, and with respect, by first learning why they believe what they believe. Why is always the best question to ask someone when they say something reactionary. Why do you believe what you believe? What brings you to those conclusions? And when they make their position, everyone has a reason why they believe something. You don't believe something just cause. You can then respectfully attain to what they believe, rather than just gaslighting people or tailing people. That's not the two options, you know. The two options isn't to gaslight or to tail people. You can actually engage with why someone believes a belief. Wonder what's going on to bring them to those positions. What are their experiences? How can you relate those experiences to what we understand as Marxists to bring them to our position? And how can you advise them towards the beginning of looking into dialectical materialism? Because it's always the place anyone and everyone should start. But people are racist because it's in their interest. Of course it's in their interest. It's based off of racism is a more extreme form of class. It's the caste system.
To work with cotton that was picked by slaves. That is solidarity as part of a coalition to defeat the slaveholders. And it was an amazing moment when Lincoln came together and he brought the labor unions and the Marxists and August Willock and Joseph Wedemeyer, who really had guns and really built a working class union, the Ohio 9th Infantry Regiment, a communist division of the Union Army. And he brought together Harriet.
Why didn't they side with the slaves against the Union Army then? if they're these great communists, why are they class collaborators? And I've been told by an American that they weren't great communists in the generals. They were people who had been flirty with Marxism in their past. To tie white generals to the slaves who were struggling for freedom and people like Harriet Tubman, who was isolated and excluded from society and treated like shit by the US government, is disgusting. Harriet Tubman was abused by the US government, treated like shit, thrown to the curb. Don't fucking dare try and attach her name to the white settler genocide of America. The fact that they go around genociding the African people, genociding the native people. Don't ever tie her to that. The US government and their flag is the flag of genocide. Heck, it's a continuation of the flag of the fucking British colonists. All you did was remove the fucking Union Jack and stick some stars on it. Well done. Fucking brilliant. Like, the idiocracy regarding how you operate, Caleb, is amazing to me. And it is idiocracy. He's not an idiot. It's idiocracy. What's idiocracy? Idiocracy is where you present a semblance of idiocy to fool the crowd. You say stupid shit to confuse history. It's a way of him doing historical revisionism. It's complete idiocracies. Like, anyone who knows the history of the last 150 years of the US knows that the end of slavery did not fucking end racism in any way, shape, or form. Actually, if you listen to speeches from Black Panthers, people like Kwame Ture, they'll tell you the history of it. All that happened was the relationship altercated, because then when they went and worked for the same people that they were enslaved by, in the same industries and environments that they were also enslaved to, what happened? Oh, they became enslaved to the company store because they got paid so little they couldn't afford to feed themselves without having to put themselves in debt, because then the store owner would turn around and, go, all right, well, you know what? You're already getting paid in a means where you can only buy things from my store. How about I put a tab on and you can run a tab with me? Well, that's a diminishing return, isn't it? Because if they're having to run a tab because they can't afford to feed themselves monthly, all they're ever going to do is beat up a never-ending debt. And that's what it became. It became a never-ending debt where you owed your life to the company store. So this isn't some, like, hokey-pokey fucking, yeah, Lincoln went and saved the slaves. Fuck you. No, it was a change of hands. It was a change of hands.
Tubman, a real badass, a fighter for black people who went around South Carolina raiding the slave plantations, freeing slaves. And he brought together Frederick Douglass, and he brought together small farmers who didn't like the big plantation owners of the South, the free soilers. And he brought together abolitionists like John Brown and revolutionary Christians who thought slavery was against the Bible. And Abraham Lincoln built this amazing united front, and they kicked the ass of the slaveholders. And Abraham Lincoln, at first, he didn't even want to abolish slavery. He didn't want to at first. He was saying, I just want...
See, look, he's like, no, Lincoln, this great guy, but no, he didn't want to do it at first. Why didn't he want to do it at first? Because he doesn't care for them. He's a racist bourgeoisie. He's not even like a good capitalist. He's a racist guy, and the class collaborationism with Lincoln was what railroaded what could have been an actual freedom struggle. You just said it yourself. There was radical Christians, radical Africans, radical fucking white people as well in general as well, with like the North Carolina division and people like that. There was people, people who were radicalized, who were organized around the, together with different racial groups. They could have struggled against the development of capitalism under the guise of the bourgeoisie. They could have done the preliminary phases of organizing things together, as, Marx and Lenin have both mentioned about being able to possibly done under a proletarian leadership, because Marx tried to do this in Germany. They tried to stage a proletarian revolution to do that. in the same mannerism similar to how the Bolsheviks had a proletarian revolution after the bourgeois revolution. Uh, um, the what's it? And I don't mean by how it's led. I mean that the implementation of democracy. It was a petty bourgeois. A bourgeois democratic revolution in February, and then the October Revolution was a proletarian democratic revolution. But the Marx tried to do the same in Germany. They could have organized amongst the people and struggled against Lincoln and the settler colonial bourgeoisie and their control over the system. They could have built a movement that succeeded in its struggles to actually end oppression. But you turn around and say, no, they did that just because they ended slavery. Oh, they did a great thing. Oh, it was the classic. Slavery was going to end. Slavery was going to end. Why? Because the slaves were always going to rise up. It doesn't matter if white people existed in the struggle or not. If white people came to support slave liberation or not. Because do you know what? Harriet Tubman would have been organizing slave rebellions whether there were white people about or not. As many other people like Harriet Tubman would have been doing. Because that is the turn of history. People will organize. Struggle never dies. It only ever has setbacks. And working with Lincoln set back the struggle of true liberation for these people. Fucking flies, man.
I just want to preserve the Union. I just don't want slavery to expand. But the class forces forced Abraham Lincoln to abolish slavery. In order to win the war, he had to move toward abolishing slavery. He was forced by history, by material conditions, to abolish slavery. And Abraham Lincoln, even though he was reluctant to do it, even though he didn't want to, he ended up presiding over the Second American Revolution. You go read W.E.B. Du Bois, the great Marxist scholar, and what he said about Black Reconstruction. And go read about what happened.
Black people weren't even seen as human according to the Constitution until the turn of the century. And they weren't treated, well, they're still not treated human today. You know, the civil rights movement, once again, railroaded and set back the struggle of African liberation. So long as they are still oppressed by the forces of the U.S. system and their culture is being wiped out, they're not free. They're still under chains. But you don't see it like that because you don't actually engage with these people who have that experience. You distance yourself from them as much as possible. Go actually speak to lumpen proletarian African people in America and see what they will tell you about the way they feel about the system of the United States and how slavery still relates to them to this day. Lincoln hero worshipping is disgusting.
Happened and how the defeat of slavery, where Abraham Lincoln led a class collaborationist united front against the British Empire and their free trade system that was holding back development and trying to keep the barbaric system of slavery in the South. You go and read about how Marxists played an amazing role in defeating that and defeating slavery, defeating the British Empire that was backing the slave traders, how the Russians sent their navy to the harbors of New York. Read about that, about how there was fear that the British would send their military to the South to support the southern slave owners. So the Russians sent their navy to New York City harbor to protect New York City and say, if the British get involved, we're getting involved. And that scared the British out of getting involved because the Russians stood with Abraham Lincoln. You have no idea about any of this. You're just like, Lincoln is an American president. He's on the $5 bill. So therefore, anyone who talks about him is a racist. You don't know what you're talking about. Study actual Marxism. Go and read what Marx wrote in
Read what Marx wrote in a letter to Lincoln. Study actual Marxism. A letter to Lincoln is not Marxist theory. And nonetheless, Marx had a wrong purview of history, a Eurocentric one that centered himself around this, that, and the other. You're really going to turn around and tell me that the white American fucking feudal lords, aristocrats, bourgeoisie, that moved into America through the British Empire were the oppressed group in America. We're really going to be beating that same victimized drum again. They were the oppressors. They were the settler colonizers. Learn how British imperialism works. Telling everyone else to learn this, learn that. Learn how British imperialism works. We oppressed certain groups. They came in afterwards. We move. The first group that moves in a British imperial settler colony is the upper class sectors, because they're the only people who can afford it. And then we build a system where we start to move people who are prisoners or slaves. So in the case of Australia, a lot of white people who did actually go over there are of a massively oppressed demographic. An example would be the Irish diaspora that is in Australia. Unfortunately, a lot of self-hating Irish people have become comeuppant to the weird British Americanism that exists in Ireland and Ireland in Australia. But nonetheless, there are and there's a lot of Cymric people as well in Australia. There's a lot of oppressed groups that are what I said. America wasn't a prison colony. It works differently. So the labor exploitation in America was primarily done through slavery. That's the way they ran it with America. Because Britain is where America's ethno-nationalistic principles come from. Britain very much was wanted its streets and all that to be white as fucking rain. When they come up with whiteness, they were very centered around Britain being this like I don't know how to word it, but think about like whatever the Nazis wanted Germany to be, like that, like this white ethno pure bullshit. So they were very they like Britain is the hinge pin of where a lot of these ideas of ethno purism comes from. Essentially, is what I'm getting at. And America gets that from Britain. So, but with the way Britain set up the empire was that America and Canada and places like that were places where slave labor was the driving force for production, and that they were utilizing the British principle of if there ain't a fence around it, we can just take it. So they went around taking any land that they could. I mean, that's the excuses they made. I mean, even if there's a fence, we take it. But the British, they go around taking anything that they please and using their excuses of, well, you've got no contract to the land, so. And so the British operation of that is the intrinsic idea that the coined Manifest Destiny, the coined Lebensraum, the empty land idea. It all of this comes and sources from Britain, and the US has consistently been incredibly British. It never was a struggle against the British way of doing things. Oh, the British feudal system. Do you know what started when the Americans were leaving the British Empire? The Industrial Revolution. Britain was developing capitalism. The peasant wars were going on in Britain at the time that America left. So this is a dishonest reading of history based on people who didn't have the same sight that we have today. Sorry, I just wiped my eye with tissue and there's blood on it. I think I'm fine. But this guy literally just turned around and preached class collaborationism as a great thing. And just threw United Front over the top of it. The United Front in China is not the same as doing class collaborationism. The big difference. The whole position with the United Front is that the proletariat will control these elements. They won't just be allowed to wantonly freely go about their thing. You know, regions that they control themselves, that's their dominated regions. This is called knowing that they're in different areas fighting a struggle. Like a national liberation struggle is not the same as a civil war between two sides of settler colonialists fighting across the colonialized lands. You know, to put this into example, this would be like me turning around and saying oh yeah, a united front between the British and the Kuomintang against the Japanese. That's what it would be like. It's not a national liberation struggle at that point then. Like, one group is obviously co-opting the other group. Because regardless of what reaction the Kuomintang have, the fact the British are involved means that the British are going to be co-opting that capitalist party. And if it's preaching socialism, we know it's not truly preaching socialism from what we learned with the fact that, I mean, before 1929, the British were literally Hitler's big little money guy. Like they funded him for the MI6. Fascinating fact.
You know, in the New York Tribune, go and read what was written by W.E.B. Du Bois. Go and read William Z. Foster and his history of the communist movement in the United States. Go and read the history of the Three Internationals. Go and read, go and understand how revolutions happen and how the defeat of slavery was a progressive step forward. And that side of the American people, the John Brown, Harriet Tubman, abolitionists, Joseph Wedemeyer, August Willich, Frederick Douglass, that progressive side of the American people who stood against the British Empire, stood against free trade, built a coalition. That's what we're trying to bring back. We are the real patriots. We love America. We love America so much that we're willing to say that the enemy of the American people isn't in Russia, isn't in China, it's on Wall Street. Then if you really love America's working families, you've got to be a communist. You've got to be an anti-imperialist. You got to want to dismantle this system of profits in command and production organized for profit. You got to want the economy to be reorganized to serve the people. That is our understanding, and it's based in scientific Marxism, for goddamn sake. Learn something. Stop this teenage LARPing.
Motherfucker, you need to learn how Marxism works, analyze material conditions, and then apply them to what we already know about Marxism, and figure out what we need to learn, what we need to know, what we need to find out. Don't just turn around and tell me, oh, read this book that was written in this time. Just read this book that was written in that time. You think I've not read some of these books? Because I might struggle with my reading, and I might not have read as much as many Marxists, but I've still read Marxism. I have to. I'm a Marxist. It's a part of the fucking role of Marxism. You read theory. But you also look at the material conditions of today and see how relevant that old theory really is. If it is not so relevant anymore, we must find new ways to look at the situation and push ourselves forward. Otherwise, we're just banging our head against the wall to see until the wall will fall down. And walls don't fall down like that. You bang your head against the wall, you're just going to end up knocking yourself out.
Crap. Seriously, get over it and grow the fuck up. All right.
Put on a goddamn suit. But now, like, the motherfucker is calling us all, fucking... He's calling us all new left now because, like, he's tried to call Pantherite ideas petty bourgeois, and Now it's been pointed out that the Panthers weren't a petty bourgeois org. There were petty bourgeois people in the org, but the org was not petty bourgeois. It wasn't centered around petty bourgeois. It was started and centered around proletarian and lumpen proletarian African people. So, you know, he turned around like, new left, new left. New left don't agree with us or even like us. The new left hate the lumpen. What the fuck you on about? God damn. And if we listen to Caleb's politics, he sounds like the type of guy who would kiss Tony Blair's feet. So I don't know what stinky cheese he's trying to throw at other people. Nonetheless, this went on way longer than it meant to because it decided to slap in the Caleb stuff. Very soon, hopefully, I should be doing a stream with Dr. Weisfeld on these issues of Palestine, so look out for that. But otherwise, red salute, and I'll catch you on the flip side. Respect, brethren.